everyone, Scott here to discuss Super 8, starring Joel Courtney, Riley Griffiths, Elle Fanning, Kyle Chandler, and A.G. McCulka, directed by J.J. Abrams. Now, why am I doing this? Well, to complete J.J. Abrams' filmography, for one thing, and it was on my list of things I needed to get done, so let's just get this over with. We open in a funeral service of the mother of Joe Lamb, played by Joel Courtney, sitting alone on a swing with his father, Deputy Jackson, played by Kyle Chandler, who doesn't know how to be a real father and throws out Louis Daynard as his friend Charles Kasnick, as well as his other friends who is afraid of Joe, who is afraid Joe doesn't want to be in his movie anymore about the living dead. And it's winter of 1978 as we move on 4 months later, when summer arrives and kids are out of school, and it's 1979 in summer, and Charles's movie adds a wife character to the protagonist of Charles's movie, and it happens to be Louis's daughter Alice, played by Elle Fanning. And they filmed the scene at midnight the night of, as Charles's sister Jen, played by A.J. McCulka, who destroyed something previously when filming Charles's movie with Jackson, while Jackson gives Joe a flyer for military school, or a camp, or something. And the filler in this movie makes total sense in the first 10 minutes. And I really like the characters from start to finish, and if I were to relate with any of them, it's Joe. And kudos to Joel Courtney and for him and director J.J. Abrams for making a relatable protagonist. Alice shows up in a car where she drives and recognizes Joe as the deputy's kid, and with Joe, doesn't tell his father, as he keeps his word, and they get to the train station, and Joe puts makeup on Alice's face, and they practice the scene before the train comes by, and they film the scene with the train in the background. And the teacher, named Dr. Woodward, drives on the tracks and crashes into the train, and the sound effects were amazing, and the effects of the exploding train was very well done. The kids go up to Dr. Woodward, telling him he was in an accident, as he points a gun at the kids, and he says, "Do not speak of this," and tells them to go. And Alice drives everyone home, and this feels very Spielbergian, as one of the producers is Steven Spielberg. And he had Close Encounters of the Third Kind, which came out a couple of years back when this movie was taking place, and E.T. the Extraterrestrial, where the protagonists were kids throughout. And you put those two movies in a blender, and you've got this movie, which is a genius idea of J.J. Abrams and producer Steven Spielberg. While in Alien breaks free, and next day Jackson has to deal with the train crash as Joe goes to Charles's house and add new scenes, and they go to a camera store to ask the clerk if he can fix the camera, which will take 3 days, or it's busted. Actually, it's totaled. What the hell am I talking about? Which Joe can use his dad's camera while Joe calls Alice and comes over the house. And the acting in this is believable by every single actor. Alice reluctantly agrees to film more of the movie and eat food at a diner while Jackson deals with the scene, and Colonel Nellick, and he's giving some ridiculous story to Jackson as he just doesn't buy it, and it involves Sherrod Pruitt, and he buys it while he goes to the gas station and gets kidnapped by the alien, while the store clerk sees Breen, who's the store clerk, listening to his headphones, and sees it outside, and he could barely hear the situation and what going on outside, which was a fantastic shot, as all the shots in this movie were fantastic from start to finish. Joe puts makeup on Alice's face, and she acts like a zombie at first, until she falls for Joe at the end of the scene, while Jackson investigates in the events happening throughout thus far, as the military comes by while Joe is looking for his dog Lucy. And I hope nothing happens to that poor doggy. As he comes home and power goes back on and off, as the cables are gone and people go missing left to right, and Jackson gets chewed out by a mob of townspeople until Mr. McCandless comes up with a good point and chats with him, and Jackson chats with him about the military communicating amongst themselves, as Joe shows Alice his train of set, and their chemistry is very charming, as I like the scenes with the two of them together. Meanwhile, Jackson hears his dog Lucy's on the other side of the county, as the deputies hear the military talking amongst each other, as Jackson sees the kids filming the movie with Alice and takes the camera away from them and chats with the colonel about the walking distance in the town, as Jackson brings Joe back to the house and tells him he can't be friends with Alice, as he talks with Lewis about Lewis and how much he has responsibilities. And Kyle Chandler plays characters with authorities very well, in my opinion, as Joe goes to the cemetery to visit his mother while having her necklace with him, and he hears a sound that were actually rather convincing while Jackson gets under military arrest, while the colonel talks with Dr. Woodward, as the colonel kills Dr. Woodward off as he is keeping secrets, and Alice visits Joe in his room and brings up how she doesn't want Joe to make Charles to blow up his trains for the movie, and they watch home movies about Joe's mother, which makes sense. And as far as the movies being that titled Super 8 goes, and Alice explains how far her father drunk that morning of his mother's death, and he wishes it was him instead of her, as it makes perfect sense for plot reasons. Joe has a cue from the crash which shrinks and goes back to its home earlier in the film, as Alice gets him and Lewis acts all aggressive to her and kicks her out of the house, which makes her cry as Lewis catches up to her and suddenly crashes his car, and she gets kidnapped by the alien. And does he have a choice but to go to Jackson? He will later in the movie, as Charles acts like a jerk to Joe and blames him for the events happening to them. And Charles says he's in love with Alice, and they see something in the footage, and what bothers Charles is Alice is in love with Joe, until they see the alien and the alarm goes off and people get evacuated because of the fire, and the citizens go with the military to keep the people safe and secured. And Charles is starting to be relatable, as I'm starting to like him, as he came off like a jerk in the beginning of the movie, but he becomes likable at this point. Joe talks with Lewis and learns Alice is still in town, as they think of a plan to rescue her, and forces Jen to go out with Danny, who's the store clerk, or not the store clerk, but the cameraman guy, or whatever the hell he is, so she can go to a party after he takes them to town, while Jackson escapes from the military, and the kids get to the school and breaks in to look for Alice, and we learn Dr. Woodward is discharged from his job in 1963 because of the alien, as he felt guilty to give it to hate everybody except for Woodward, as it understands him. And this is making so much sense, as you have to give it time to explain what happened to Dr. Woodward, as the military comes to the school and get the kids and take Joe's mother's necklace now of Donnie wasn't. Now, if Donnie wasn't stupid enough to pay attention, the military wouldn't have grabbed the kids, as Jackson sneaks around and asks about Joe, and I'm on the edge of my seat at this point to see what the alien looked like. The alien crashes into the bus with the kids as it lets them out and beat up on the military bus. As they do escape, and the alien in this movie made me think of the monster in Cloverfield with its big bug eyes. As Jackson brings Lewis to look for the kids, and Donnie comes by to saves the kids, and Joe drives while Donnie is stoned as they get to the cemetery to save Alice's life, and end up at a house to get blown up, but not dead, by the military. And Joe goes up to the cemetery with the kid that blows things up, named Carrie, while Charles stays back with Marty, who was one of their friends. And they get to the cemetery to find Alice, and these scenes are suspenseful for sure. Lewis confesses to Jackson he didn't mean to kill his wife, and Jackson says it was an accident, while Joe and Carrie go to the alien's hideout to look for Alice, while the alien crawls around the place as it's like a spider where it webs up people, and as it's a monster from Cloverfield put in a blender with the spider, and you've got this alien. And that's a good mixture, like the mixture of Close Encounters of the Third Kind and E.T. Put together. While Carrie blows up and some firecrackers to distract the alien, and Joe wakes up as Alice by slapping her, which is something you should never do in general. And we learn it wants to go back home, which feels like E.T. Phone home. Sheriff Pruitt leads the team until the alien gets him dead, as well as another woman scared to death. And the alien confronts the kids, and Joe tells the alien they understand it wants to go home, and the world isn't a cruel place, as well as it could still live. And when I get a clear look at it, they look like the aliens from District 9 as it goes back up to its ship and goes home, and it makes a model to go back home. And Jackson and Lewis catch up to their kids and hug it out while Joe lets go of his mother and his necklace as credits roll. But on the side of the credits, we see Charles's Living Dead movie called The Case coming to the Cleveland International Festival of the Year. And I really liked the climax as well as this movie. But how much did I like it? Let's talk about it in a rating. I'll give this movie a 8.3 out of 10. The film makes sense in the first 10 minutes and throughout the movie, and the character I relate with the most is Joe and Alice as the relatable protagonists, and I like the characters throughout the movie, and kudos to the two actors, Joel Courtney, Elle Fanning, and director J.J. Abrams, making these relatable people. And the sound effects were amazing, and the effects on the train blowing up was very well done, in my opinion. One of the producers of this movie was Steven Spielberg, who had Close Encounters of the Third Time, which came out a couple of years before the events of this movie, and E.T., where the protagonists were kids throughout. And you put those two movies in a blender, and you got this movie, which is a genius idea of both director J.J. Abrams and producer Steven Spielberg. And the acting in this movie is believable, and the cinematography is great to watch for a sci-fi drama, as the shots in this movie were fantastic from start to finish. It was a smart choice to make the first appearance of the alien at the end of the movie, which feels like a J.J. Abrams trick, as he did it in some monster movies like Cloverfield, for example. And this is a very good movie, and it straight up is a solid recommendation for this movie, as the kids were the best thing about the movie, in my opinion. And the plot was on the edge of my seat intense, particularly when we first see the alien in this movie. And it works, and I wish J.J. Abrams made more monster movies, as this might be his best monster movie, in my opinion. Forget Cloverfield, but this is better. So I'd like to thank you guys for joining me for this review, and until then, I come in peace.